All right, welcome, and this is Alex Mondosian again. I'm here with Jack Canfield in a previously recorded interview, and this is for the Africa Alive Education Foundation, of course, and of the many thought leaders, Jack is one of the ones I respect most because he's had the most personal impact on me. And I'm going to ask you, Jack, the first 4 questions I've been asking everyone else, many of whom are your buddies. Number 1 question is, what specific incident changed your life when someone gave to you?
Well, Alex, I grew up in Wheeling, West Virginia, and at the time there were only 48 states in the Union, and West Virginia was ranked 46th in terms of its educational system, in terms of providing a good education. So I would not be sitting here today talking to you if I hadn't had a person that basically underwrote me to go to a private school and provided me with a 8-year scholarship from the 5th grade until I graduated high school to go to a local school that was a private school. And as a result of that, I was able to get into Harvard, and I studied Chinese history and later psychology there and went on to create the life that I have. And it was the scholarship that was provided to me both in the private school and later I went to Harvard on scholarship. Somebody said, look, education's important enough, and providing people that don't have the resources and the money and the funding to be able to get the kind of education allowed me literally to vector out of a very lower class economic situation to today be, one of the main teachers in the world, living a lifestyle that most people are envious of. And so that generosity literally changed my life.
Jack, I've interviewed you at least a couple dozen times, and you never have told that story before.
No one ever asked me that question before.
I'm going to have to say that not only did it change your life, that giver must have impacted probably millions of lives, not only through Chicken Soup and the success principles and the law of attraction through the movie The Secret, but just all the thought leaders that you've taken under your wing and you've influenced as well. So that one giving incident that went over, 8 years had a much bigger impact than just on your life.
No, it's true. It's the old dropping a pebble into the middle of a pond and the waves that go out, you have no idea. I mean, I get that every day when I go on the road and people come up to me and they say, because of your Chicken Soup book for this, that, or the other thing, my daughter didn't commit suicide, or it gave comfort to my wife as she was dying with cancer in a hospice center, etc. And you never, ever, ever know the full range of the impact of a simple gift. I mean, we could save the life of a child in Africa, and that could be the child who comes up later with the solution to AIDS, or invents safe nuclear energy, or invents a way to desalinate water and solves the water problem in the world. That's the potential of every life we impact, is that they go on to impact other lives.
What about the specific incident that changed your life when you gave to someone else?
Well, as you know, Mark Victor Hansen and I, with the Chicken Soup books, we've given away millions of dollars, planted millions of trees, built wells in Africa, given scholarships, supported animal shelters, and helped literacy programs, and stopping child abuse, and so on and so forth. But the main, I would say, when I was thinking about this question, what's really been the biggest impact of the gift I've given? And those gifts are kind of anonymous. You write a check and occasionally you get a letter or a picture, like when you do saving a child through Save the Children, the kid will write you a card. But probably the most personal example was I was over in Tahiti, and my wife and I were faculty for a conference on a boat, really, called the CEO, Chief Executive Officers. These are all people that were chairman of the board or CEOs of companies. And morning would be training programs and information, and I would be speaking and so forth. And the afternoon was kind of a social kind of things, and we had this excursion where we were going to bike around the island. And so I have my 2 young sons with me, and they were, I think, about 15 at the time. And so the 3 of us were going to bond by biking around the island. Mm-hmm. And as we were biking around, when we hit the one side of the island, what they call the windward side, now I know why, it was like a 50-mile wind coming straight at us. It's one of those things, where you're swimming in a river and you're swimming as hard as you can and you're not moving an inch forward. And people were being blown off their bikes. It was just really pretty dicey. So my son and I were doing a pretty good job, and all of a sudden we're coming around this corner, and this woman named Stevie Eller, who probably about 70 at the time, somewhere in that range, had just fallen off her bike. And she had very badly cut her left leg on the bicycle chain, that she was bleeding. And I remember I had a choice to make. She was obviously going to be okay because it was a group bike trip, but no one was really stopping, and she was walking her bike, and she tied a T-shirt around her leg, not a tourniquet, but just more like a Band-Aid thing. And I remember saying to my boys, I said, you guys go on, I'm going to help this woman. I stopped, and I walked with her for about almost an hour and a half. And there was nowhere you could stop. This was literally like the highway through the middle of nowhere on the side of the island. It was just a rock hillside. And I walked with her for an hour and a half. I talked to her, and I helped her with her bike, and I talked and just kind of encouraged her. And there was nowhere to call a phone. There was no cars coming by. And eventually we got to where humanity, civilization started again, and we went into this little hotel resort place, and we called, and then they were able to send a car for her and everything. And I thought that was the end of it. And at the end of that evening, we were going into dinner, and she said, I'd like you and your family to join my husband and me for dinner. And I said, fine. So we joined him for dinner. It's Carl Eller. Turns out he's a very wealthy guy, worked in the entertainment industry as a philanthropist, and he put together the business schools named after him at the University of Arizona. And so we talked and talked and talked. And later, as a result of just a wonderful conversation, she and her husband nominated me to receive the National Achievement Summit Award, which they give about 20 of these a year out. People like Bob Dylan and Bill Clinton and the guy who started AOL and the people who started Google and things like that, who've made an amazing contribution to American culture. So as a result of that, I got to go to this awards dinner. Like, it was like going to the Academy Awards. And he couldn't believe all the people that I mentioned, Bill Clinton and the founder of AOL and Google, and George Lucas, the filmmaker, and Shimon Peres, the Prime Minister of Israel. There was Hamid Karzai, the President of Afghanistan. David Gergen, who I always see on TV, is a political commentator and works at the Harvard School, the Kennedy School of Government. And, I could list 100 names of famous people like James Earl Jones and Coretta Scott King and so forth who were there. And I got to spend 4 days interacting with these people, eating lunch with them, eating breakfast with them, and many of these people have become my friends, and I've had invitations to speak at the Kennedy School. None of that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't stopped and said, look, I'm not going to focus on my needs. I'm going to focus on helping someone else. And as a result of that, there's probably been 100 events that have occurred in the last 5 years that wouldn't have entered into my life had I not stopped to be a giver instead of a taker.
That is another amazing story. Wow. Giving has a focus on it right now. I think President Clinton, who you just mentioned, has had a big impact on that through his book Giving, but just giving in general is a big deal, and all the members of TLC, which you started, are big givers, and many thought leaders are givers. Do you feel that there's a sense of giving right now that's more than ever before? Even through the movie The Secret, I think has had a huge impact on giving. We know how important it is to the future of humanity, but do you feel that that is shifting and more people are giving now, or is it just that we're here and it just seems that way?
I think there are more people that are giving. I think we're all realizing as the world shrinks and we see it through television and the internet, there's nothing you can escape. It used to be you could live in Wheeling, West Virginia. You had no idea what was happening in Sri Lanka when the tsunami hits or the hurricane comes in. You had no understanding of what was going on in Darfur. You had no understanding of the poverty, the illiteracy, the problem with AIDS, the fratricide, etc., that we engage in. We had no idea. And now we do. And I think we all feel that we're part of a common humanity, that we are all one. And literally, if any of us hurt, we all hurt. It's kind of like we're a body, and when the foot hurts because I've stepped on a tack, the hand can't be doing anything right then other than fixing the foot because it's just too painful. Our attention is on it. We can't pretend it's not part of our body. And too often we pretend that the parts of humanity are in our body. And I think people are getting that. And I think the other thing that's happening is because there's so much abundance in the world, you had to be making multiple billions to be on the Forbes 400 list this last year. So we have billionaires everywhere, and we're starting to see that 3% of the people own 97% of the resources, and that doesn't work. That has to be redistributed. So with people like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Warren Buffett giving all of his money to them and Donald Trump giving money and the guy who started CNN, whose name's escaping me right now, Ted Turner, making $1 billion grant to the UN and so forth, that we're being inspired at a higher level by big giving. And then what's happening because of the micro-lending situation, where we all know that even a $25 loan to an African business person who wants to expand her little craft business or hire one more person to expand her little restaurant that she's got, which is basically cooking over outdoor fire and cooking fish for the local villagers, that those kind of micro loans can make a huge impact in the economic growth of the people out there in the world. We see that these microloans have about a 96% payback rate. And so there's a group called Kiva, which I support, a $10 loan, and you get to find out where it went, how it impacted people. So it's gotten beyond the write a check to the Red Cross to a much more interactive where I can see the results of my money. And I think that humanity is growing at a level of awareness and compassion right now that wasn't true before.
Yeah, I agree. And a cause like this, the Africa Alive Project, what relevance does that have? And you talk about micro-lending. Micro-fundraising is what this is. Mm-hmm. Instead of $2,000, $5,000, $10,000, which is exclusive, people can't all afford that. $25, $50, $100, $500 builds a home for these Africans in these villages, and it prevents a lot of disease. And, of course, AIDS is the single biggest factor that they're trying to overcome. Why is a cause like this so important to support and to give to?
Well, I think it's important not just for the recipient, but important for those of us who give. We live in a cocooning world right now where we're all isolated. We get all our news now from the internet. We don't even have to go out and buy a newspaper. And so we're in our little bubbles and our little shells and our little micro communities that we live in. And I think that there's a sense of alienation that we experience literally is hurting us. And the more we connect with those that have a need, those that are our brothers and sisters in the world, the more we're fulfilled. I mean, I interviewed a guy named Kenneth Baring for the Success Principles book, and he was a guy who at one point was one of the co-owners of the Seattle Seahawks. It's worth $500 million, and he was not happy. And he said he went through 4 stages of his life. The first stage was called stuff. He bought all the stuff that was supposed to make you happy. He had the car and the boat and the airplane and all the clothes and the watches and so forth. And he wasn't happy. He said, well, maybe I needed better stuff. So I bought a more expensive car and a more expensive boat and a bigger house. And he still wasn't happy. He said the third stage of his life was what he called different stuff. He said, well, maybe I've been getting the wrong stuff. He said, that's when I bought the Seattle Seahawks football team, thinking, wow, if you own a football team, you got to be happy with a bunch of guys. You go in the locker room, and all that. He still wasn't happy. Finally, one of his friends invited him to go on an airplane with him and take wheelchairs to some kids, like over in the Bosnia-Herzegovina area, after the war was going on over there and kids were stepping on landmines and so forth. And he said he was picking up children and putting him into these wheelchairs, and one of the boys wouldn't let go of his leg. He was an 11-year-old boy, and he was looking at him, turned around like he was wanting to get away, and the boy wouldn't let go, and he turned around to look into his eyes, and through an interpreter, the boy said, please don't go yet. He said, I want to memorize your face. He said, because when we meet again in heaven, I want to thank you one more time. And he said that that moment was the first time he felt pure joy in his life. And since then, Ken came back and he started the Kenneth Baring Wheelchair Foundation. And he's given away, I think, 40,000 wheelchairs around the world. If you go to his website, there are pictures of him in every country with every known nationality and race. And now he's taken on clean water in Africa because he realizes so many of the kids are dying from cholera and dysentery and so forth. And he said he's happier than a pig in mud, like I say in West Virginia. And up until then, he wasn't happy, and all the happiness was coming from service. So I know for me, when I was in Cameroon a couple of years ago, my brother-in-law was the ambassador over there. It's the first time I'd been in sub-Saharan Africa. I've been to Morocco before. But anyway, we're down there, and as we were traveling around visiting schools and orphanages and hospitals and visiting the missionaries and so forth, we just saw how much a little can do. And, when you're there and you're talking to a kid and you see the flies on his wound and so forth, you're thinking, oh, my God, if this was my neighbor, I would rush to the drugstore and I would buy the bandages and the antibiotics and we'd get this kid taken care of. But because we're here in America and we don't see that, we don't have that opportunity. So I left there making a commitment to build 60 wells. And so far we've built 30 of them over there, and we're continuing to collect money, and I'm raising it, giving my own as well, and so forth. I get pictures back of the wells and the community around them when the water starts flowing, and I can have that feeling of fulfillment because I was there with those people. And there's very little that fulfills me more than when people either write me or talk to me and say, because of what you did, my life is better. That's why I don't retire. That's why I keep giving. That's why I keep going out there and raising funds for valuable projects.
Well, that's great, Jack. And in this particular project, $500 builds shelter in the African village that Getrude is really supporting. So if let's say 50 people donate $10, or if 5 people donate $100, or if one person donates $500, then there's a new home.
Think about it. You and I have gone out and we've signed a credit card for a dinner with our friends that was well over $500.
Yeah.
And for that one dinner.